agreement on a new NAFTA deal. For more, we're joined by an expert. He's trade lawyer Lawrence Herman at Herman and Associates. Thanks for coming in.
I'm happy to be here.
What do you think?
Well, I think it looks pretty good from what we know, what we've seen. It's a complex agreement, but I think that it came out better than many of us had expected. I have to admit, I was pessimistic that we would get this kind of an outcome, but it looks pretty good. And I think the market is reacting accordingly. There's more stability now in the system, and that's a plus for Canada.
Why don't we talk, first of all, about what Canada appears to have defended and maintained, the Chapter 19 dispute resolution mechanism. Talk to us in a bit of detail about what that is and why it's important.
Well, that's important because it gives Canada or Canadian companies that are caught up in U.S. trade action the opportunity to have the matter determined on review by a binational panel, and that was a major factor for Canada. Canada insisted on that Chapter 19 in the NAFTA being maintained, and it looks like we've got that. You know, that was a concern by Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative, but it didn't really affect jobs in the U.S. So I doubt if the White House saw it the way the U.S. trade representative saw it. You know, eliminating a binational panel system was important for the lawyers, but frankly, there were no job issues there. So it seems that the U.S. was prepared to agree to that system being maintained. And it looks like basically it's been maintained in this new deal.
At the same time, something referred to as the Chapter 11 provision apparently is being torn up and discarded, and that is perhaps similar to Chapter 19, but it allows companies to sue governments within
there was no Canadian interest, in my view, in maintaining that Chapter 11 investment dispute system in a new agreement. There was no national interest involved, and so that's been eliminated. It's been maintained in terms of U.S.-Mexico deal, but as far as Canada is concerned, it's eliminated, and I think that's a good thing.
One of the things I want to ask you, but obviously it's great that the fog is cleared off the runway now. We can see a little bit further to the future. Obviously, certainty helps markets overall, but if there was one nuance or one Achilles heel to this deal that you foresee that if it gets passed, what is that Achilles heel specifically?
Well, I think these trade agreements involve give and take. You got to compromise to gain. And what we didn't gain was an elimination of the extraordinary tariffs on steel and aluminum. That is an unfortunate outcome, but I think from what I've seen, the parties are going to continue to talk about it. Whether we get anything from that remains to be seen, but that is something we had to give up, and that's unfortunate. We did make some progress on some other issues, but not on that one.
Was it realistic for Canada to expect the U.S. to stand down on those steel and aluminum tariffs? I seem to hear you saying, yes, that was a realistic goal.
Well, I think it could have been part of the package, but the U.S. has dug their heels in on this national security provision, and they're not prepared to back off. I should say that another area where we have given up something, I think it's to the benefit of Canadian consumers, is on supply management. The U.S. gets greater access to dairy and something that hasn't been mentioned very often, eggs and poultry, which are also supply managed commodities.
Right.
So there's a give that we had to put on the table. And that is part of the process of negotiating. It was, in my view, a foregone conclusion that we would have to give up something on the supply managed sector. That's what trade agreements are all about.
How much did we give up? I'm seeing the figure 3.6% of Canada's dairy sector now open to the United States. That sounds like 96% remains closed.
Well, that's right. We had to open it up a little bit. You know, the dairy industry said any concession to the U.S. is unacceptable, and I thought that was an unrealistic position for the Canadian dairy farmers to take. Yeah, the U.S. demanded greater access to our dairy sector, and that was on the table, as I said, from the beginning. It just couldn't be said politically by the government. And we've had to retract the Class 7 ultra-filtered milk provisions. I don't want to get into the details, but that was also something that I think we would have had to give up to get a deal with the Americans. But the big deficit that for us, the big negative is the lack of progress on the steel and aluminum tariffs. That's unfortunate.
What about a similar issue, tariffs, the threat of tariffs on automobiles and auto products? What has happened is the threshold, the numerical threshold on the number of vehicles that can go ship from Canada to the U.S. tariff-free has been raised to 2.6 million vehicles. People seem to be saying that is so high that effectively is an assurance of no U.S. tariffs.
I think that's right. We've maintained our market share and our ability to export duty-free automobiles and auto parts to the U.S. subject to that cap. And I think that the auto sector spokespersons have indicated that that's probably not a problem for Canada. For Mexico, there are some issues. They have given up a lot on rules of origin, content requirements. But you know what's going to happen is that Mr. Trump is going to use this as a great victory. And remember, the focus from day one in these NAFTA renegotiations was always about Mexico as far as the U.S. was concerned. That's where they saw the job losses going. And that's where, in the auto sector, they focus their efforts. And I think Trump will be able to use this politically in the coming midterms. Look, I've got jobs back from Mexico. Canada was never a problem for the U.S. on autos. And he'll be able to use this, I think, to some advantage in the coming midterms.
Yeah, I think he'll be doing a lot of victory laps, I'm sure. Is there any other nuances to the deal that you foresee being a challenge actually moving forward, though, that maybe didn't get fully addressed that really need to be? Because we're in this new e-economy of social media and technology, innovations, patents, intellectual property. Was there anything that was kind of left out a little bit that may cause a future problem?
Well, you know, a lot of effort was spent on modernizing the NAFTA, bringing it up to date, dealing with digital commerce and those sorts of things. And we really haven't focused on that in the discussions we've had publicly. But that will be a plus, modernizing the NAFTA, bringing it up to date. You know, it's a 25-year-old agreement. It needs to be updated. And I think progress was made in that regard, which is a plus.
Very quickly, last question. How significant is the extended patent protection on pharmaceutical drugs?
I don't think it's terribly significant. It's a 2-year extension, and it's not patent protection, it's data protection. And I think that we can live with that.
Lawrence Herman, thank you a great deal for joining us. Lawrence Herman is a trade expert and a trade lawyer at Lawrence Herman and Associates.